Hi, everyone. Welcome to Kiwi College. I'm Sarah Smith, the editor of Kiwi, and I'm so glad you could all join us today to learn about DHA. Today's webinar is sponsored by Martech DSM, and we're fortunate to have a real expert on DHA speaking to us today. Sheila Gautier is a clinical nutritionist and the project manager for scientific affairs for Martech DSM, where she keeps up to date on the latest scientific research, and she has more than 20 years experience with infants, kids, and moms, so I think we're all going to learn a lot. We're so happy to have you here, Sheila, so please take it away.
Great. Thank you so much for having me with you today. Many of you will already be aware of DHA because it's more than likely while you were pregnant, your prenatal vitamin actually had DHA in it. And so probably your obstetrician or their nurse already mentioned to you that DHA is so important for the development and function of your infant's brain, but also in their eye development. But today I'll talk a little bit about that, but more we'll be discussing some of the benefits that we see the science reporting in young children, but also you'll discover as moms it's important that you get adequate amounts of DHA, as do all other members of your family, because it provides important health benefits across the lifespan. So let's just take a look at the omega-3 fatty acid family, and you can see that there are actually three members. So there's alpha-linolenic acid, or ALA, eicosapentaenoic acid, or EPA, docosahexaenoic acid, or DHA. And so it's not really surprising that on labels you'll see all of these abbreviated to ALA, EPA, or DHA. Typically you'll see them described as polyunsaturated fatty acids and essential fatty acids. So from chemistry you probably remember that fats are split into categories. So you have saturated fat, monounsaturated fat, and polyunsaturated fatty acids. And DHA belongs to the polyunsaturated group, and that's one of the ones which has these tremendous health benefits associated with it. Now, the term essential fatty acid, what that means is that you have to get a source of that particular fatty acid from your diet, because your body or the cells within your body really any biochemical pathways that are capable of producing them. Now, at one time it was thought that ALA was the essential fatty acid, so that if you took in enough flax or sources from walnuts, canola, or soybean oil, that you would not only be getting enough ALA, but your body would convert it to EPA and then on to DHA. But the science now shows that that's not the case. So when you take in, say, something like flaxseed, then you'll be getting a tremendous source of ALA, but the ALA does not convert to DHA. So the only way that you can get adequate DHA is really to look for a source. And this is where it gets a bit complicated when you actually go into the stores to shop, because the labels can be a bit misleading. So you'll often see products saying great source of omega-3 fatty acids, but that doesn't always mean that it's a great source of DHA. Typically what it means is it's a great source of ALA, and as you know, that's not going to help you with your DHA. So when you're in the stores, the best things to look for would either be an algal source of DHA, which we'll talk a lot more about later in terms of supplements that are available, and also some food products that have algae used as the source of DHA, or fish itself. But you have to be very specific about the type of fish that you purchase. So it would need to be fatty fish from cold water. So that's things like salmon, herring, tuna fish, sardine. And although organ meats do have a little bit of DHA in there, it's not very much. Similarly, standard eggs have very small amounts, but again, just tiny amounts. The exception to that would be there are some products on the market now where the chickens have actually been fed with DHA or omega-3s, and so the DHA levels of the eggs will actually be much higher. But in general, when you're looking for sources of DHA, just remember that your plant sources are ALA, and when you think marine sources, fish oil, algal sources, that's where you're getting the DHA from. And a fact that you might not be aware of is fish don't actually make their own DHA and EPA. The source that they get that from is the algae. And so some fish are better consumers of the algae, and so that's why it's important that you choose the fishes that I just mentioned to make sure that you're getting a great source. But as a mom, I know it can be quite a struggle getting the family to eat fish, and the recommendation is generally 1 to 2 servings per week. And in the case where that's tough to do, and that certainly is for lots and lots of reasons, there are some other opportunities, thankfully, now that you can look for. So there are food products, wide varieties ranging from milk, yogurt, dairy products, even there are now some soy milks available on the market. You will see eggs, which are higher in DHA, and also some breads, juices, fruit juices that are supplemented with DHA. So if we look at the health benefits depicted on this particular slide, it becomes evident really quickly that the source that you choose for your omega-3 is so important, because they're not all created equal when it comes to the health benefits that they give you. So ALA is certainly the parent in the family, but we know that that's important for example, hair, skin health. But if you look to the far left with DHA, for example, you can see that it's the only one that provides you with these important cognitive and visual, both development and function benefits beginning early in life, which you heard about while you were pregnant, but also continue to be important throughout life, and we'll talk about these a little bit later. Inflammation is important because DHA is a potent anti-inflammatory, and we care about that because so many of the diseases that are reported today, for example, like cardiovascular disease or some of the degenerative eye diseases, have an inflammation component. So it's important that DHA can be protective in that area. And then, of course, for cardiovascular health, we often think of that as being something that we have to worry about more later in life, but we now recognize that signs of cardiovascular disease, sadly, are being seen much earlier in life with children. So if we think about how DHA actually achieves these effects, you know, the obvious question is, well, you say that it does all these things, but how can that actually be possible? Well, the way that it does that is that you can think of DHA almost like calcium. You think of calcium as being a building block, important in bone and teeth. And so DHA is the important building block in the brain, the eye, and the heart. And so each cell in your body is surrounded by a membrane, and DHA is actually an integral part of each of these membranes in each of your cells. And what it does is it not only influences the structure of the membrane, but also the function of that membrane, what happens there. And so in the bottom right-hand side, you can see a pictorial of DHA, and it just shows you that it's a very long, fluid, flexible molecule. And what it does is it imparts these qualities to the cell membranes that it's present in. And so in doing so, it can influence gene expression and signaling of information, not only within cells, but also between cells. And very importantly, it can regulate metabolic pathways which promote health. So DHA is found in extremely high levels in the brain, eye, and heart, and of course that's where we see these health benefits being reported most. If we take a look at this slide, this really just shows you DHA as the omega-3, the high levels that exist within, for example, the retina, brain, and also the eye. And if I were to superimpose ALA and EPA on there as well, you would see that there are very, very few amounts of ALA and EPA in these tissues. In fact, DHA, when you compare it to EPA, typically in most cells it's 5 to 30 times higher. But when we look at tissues like the brain and the eye and the heart, it can be several hundredfold higher in abundance in these tissues. So it's not really surprising that it's, when we look at the research, that it's DHA that is showing these health benefits. When we consider brain growth itself in childhood, well, we're certainly aware of publications that talk about the importance of DHA below 2 years of age, and there's often the misunderstanding that the brain doesn't really do much growing and development beyond age 2, so why would we possibly need DHA? Well, the truth is that's just not true, because although you can say that there's a tremendous amount of growth during pregnancy and up to the second year of life for the brain, actually almost 30% of your brain's weight increases beyond age 2. And so each time your brain is growing and it's diversifying in terms of function, you need a source of DHA. Now, if we look at the right of the slide, when we look at brain features, the two main things to remember is we're looking at different regions of the brain, and that those are the regions of the brain that are most important for memory and learning. Now, when you look at neuron numbers, you can see that there are tremendous changes between ages 2 and 6. And just remember that neurons are essentially a network of nerve cells in the brain that transmits information within the brain. And then if we think about, for example, myelination, that continues actually up into your 20s and 30s. And myelin is really, you can think of it as an insulator that wraps around the cells, those neurons. And in doing so, it is essential for the proper functioning of your nervous system. So you can see that DHA has tremendous value before age 2, but it continues to have a great deal of value well beyond that. So if we look at the intake of omega-3s around the world, we can see that there's a huge variation in intake. So if you look to the far right, you will see that countries like Denmark and Japan have very high intakes of, for example, DHA and EPA, and that's because they consume very large quantities of these fatty fish that we talked about earlier. Sadly, when you look to the left, you'll see that in the majority of other countries, the intakes of fish are very, very low, and subsequently DHA levels are low. So when you think about recommendations for 1 to 2 servings of fish per week, actually less than 10% of the population in the United States consume this amount. That equates to, we take in about 80 milligrams per day, and the recommendations are suggesting for adults 250 to 500 milligrams per day. So you can see that there's a huge deficit between recommendations and intake. And then when we look at children, the story doesn't really get any better, because when you think of what children 2 to 11 years of age eat, they're not eating fatty fish typically. So their intakes are approximately 20 to 30 milligrams of DHA per day. Now, that's a great concern, because although when you were pregnant and taking your prenatal vitamin, which is a tremendous source of DHA, and similarly when you were nursing, or indeed if your baby had infant formula, they got great sources of DHA, but as soon as that weaning process begins at around about 4 to 6 months of age, you can see this tremendous decline in DHA intake, which is of great concern because, of course, the brain is continuing to develop tremendously beyond age 2. Now, when you look to the right-hand side of the slide, you'll see recommendations that were just recently published from the World Health Organization. And what they did was they spoke to a large group of experts around the world and asked them to take a look at recommendations for intake. And so they came up with these numbers for different age groups. And you can see, for example, the levels being 100 to 150 milligrams for ages 2 to 4, 150 to 200 for ages 4 to 6. Now, when you get to age 10 with the World Health recommendations, they then shift to 250 milligrams, so that's for age 10 and above. So adults, again, it would be that minimum level of 250 milligrams per day. Now, just remember that the research that's available shows that alpha-linolenic acid does not increase your blood levels of DHA, so make sure that it's DHA that you're taking in. So when we look at other expert groups around the world, you can see here's the FAO, WHO recommendations at the bottom. And don't be put off by the fact that some of the other recommendations are just, are a little bit different. You can see that the age groups that they split these values into are just a little bit different, and so too are the amounts. What you're looking for is, somewhere in that 70 to 125 milligram range for the 1 to 3 years of age. So it's just a ballpark range that this helps give you, but you'll see that there are some countries who are very specific that the need is for DHA because they believe that the need for DHA in the brain is so high that they give very specific recommendations for that. Some of the others give you a mix of DHA and EPA. So this particular slide that just gives you an idea that there's really a tremendous amount of science supporting the role of DHA across the lifespan. And if you take a look at some of the results under each of these age groups, you can see that there's a great deal of diversity in the types of research that's been conducted. But basically, all of them are looking at the effects reported in the brain, eye, and heart. So you will certainly be familiar with some of the earlier studies which were more focused on fish intake and supplementation of moms with DHA, and they were able to show that the babies whose mothers had higher intakes of DHA during that time had more mature eye and brain function compared to those that had very low intake. And for moms, there were also benefits, but it's true to say that the effect on decreasing the risk of preterm birth, that really varies from study to study. More recently, the scientists who were focused on these earlier years are now conducting research in the areas of toddlers, 4-year-olds, and adolescents, and we'll talk a great deal about that more as we go on. But also there's a focus on the benefits in general to adults. So that would be benefits in terms of the eye, but also the brain in terms of cognitive function as we age, and of course, last but not least, cardiovascular function. And these benefits are seen to expand into very specific populations like adults who are athletes. So if we look specifically at the brain health benefits of DHA, again, when you see that DHA is actually the most abundant of the omega-3s in the brain, it maybe becomes a little less surprising. There are a number of studies, certainly, that we just talked about in terms of fish intake and supplementation of moms and the effects on their toddlers, but there are also other studies that show the importance of these early years in terms of effects on IQ, even at 4 years of age. So these infants who had received higher levels of DHA were demonstrating higher IQ scores at even 4 years of age. So the effects are long-lasting. But if we look at a slightly older population, for example, 4-year-olds who were supplemented with 400 milligrams of DHA while they were preschoolers for 4 months, the same types of results were actually found. So in the kids who had received the supplements, they demonstrated higher scores on a test that can be used to predict school success. And then when you looked at the blood levels of DHA in those particular kids, you could see that the ones who had higher blood levels of DHA, which indicates higher intakes of DHA from the supplement, those were the ones that had the higher test scores. So if we look at kids that are even older, and maybe I should refer to them as adolescents, in population studies where they looked at fish intake, they were able to show that in adolescents who were 15, who had more than 1 serving of fish per week, when they looked at their IQ scores at age 18, those that had higher intakes of fish, namely 1 serving and above, did indeed have higher IQ scores. And that was even when you were considering important factors like socioeconomic status and also parental education level, which you know can kind of blur things a little bit. So even taking that into consideration, the authors of this particular study believed that it was the DHA present in the fish that was responsible for this very positive outcome. Now the benefits don't just stop there. We now see benefits being reported in older adults. Some of the older literature had indicated to us that high levels of, or I should say really higher levels of DHA intake were associated with a 60% reduced risk of certain types of dementia, and that would actually include Alzheimer's disease. Now, another factor which is of great concern to our baby boomers is this age-related cognitive decline decline, which is really just a very posh way of describing the slowing in mental faculties with aging, so a slowing of memory and in learning abilities. And we used to think of that as something that was completely unchangeable. It was just something that we had to deal with. But new research is indicating happily that that's not the case. And there was a study published very recently in the prestigious Journal of Alzheimer's and Dementia, and they had individuals who were 55 plus, basically, and they were provided with 900 milligrams of DHA for approximately 6 months. Now, in the group who received the supplementation, after the 6-month period, they measured their memory and learning skills, and they found that in the supplemented group that they actually had memory and learning skills of someone 3.5 years younger. So that is tremendous news that DHA has health benefits not only from the time of pregnancy, but right through until our older years. Similarly, when we look at eye health benefits, we're certainly all aware of the benefits, when infants were supplemented with DHA, either from mom's breast milk or infant formula. In fact, some of these earlier studies showed that there could be 1.5 line advantage in the eye chart for those who had received higher levels of DHA as compared to those who had not. But in terms of, as we're getting older, there is an increasing incidence of degenerative eye diseases such as age-related macular disease, and that's the leading cause of blindness in adults over 50. Actually, you start to see the numbers shift as early as 40. And so the sad news about these degenerative eye diseases is that they can be very difficult to treat. The treatments are very invasive and they're very expensive, and the effects actually are quite limited too. And so the best route is really in terms of prevention, and the good news is that there have been a number of studies demonstrating the benefits and advantages that supplementation with these long-chain polyunsaturated fatty acids give. They can actually reduce the risk by 34 to 45%, and that's pretty significant. And again, it's not surprising that DHA really gives you that benefit because it is the most abundant omega-3 present in the retina of the eye. If we move on to heart benefits now, there's a couple of things to be aware of. One, of course, DHA again is the most abundant omega-3 in the heart. But signs of cardiovascular disease begin very early in life. Actually, fatty plaques have been reported in very young children. And we now know, too, that even when you look at blood pressure, the infants have been shown to exhibit high blood pressure, and that problem can actually be tracked into the adult years. So it's so important that we have an adequate source of DHA, not only for support of eye and brain health, but the changes that we make early in life can be so important and have impact on our cardiovascular health later in life. So although the studies originally looked at the benefits of DHA and EPA combined together, because that was really the only source available at that time, starting about 10 years ago when just a single source of DHA became available, it became clear quite quickly that DHA was a bit of a powerhouse on its own, that it had some very important cardiovascular benefits, even when supplemented on its own. And one of these benefits would be in the area of reducing triglyceride levels. And that's important because triglycerides, of course, are the type of fat that can build up in the artery wall and can lead to that narrowing, which causes problems. But in the studies, only 1 to 2 grams per day of DHA were actually able to reduce these triglyceride levels in people who had normal triglyceride levels or very high triglyceride levels, even in the case of individuals who needed medications to help treat this. The supplementation with DHA had an added effect. And you're probably also aware of the effects of HDL in terms of being protective. You can think of that as it's a type of protein which is considered a healthy type of protein because it carries cholesterol away from the bloodstream to the liver to get rid of it. And so when you supplement with DHA, you can see some positive effects on those particular levels. Additionally, DHA supplementation can help in terms of reducing heart rate, which is a good thing, but also in reducing blood pressure a little bit. It also has benefits in terms of adults, because we can see that it has effects in adults who are exercising, because it lowers the exercising and submaximal heart rate and increases blood flow and oxygen delivery to the muscles. And so ultimately that could potentially lead to improvements in cardiac efficiency, and of course that relates very importantly to the athlete for performance. So if we just take a quick peek at the athletes in more detail, it's important to note that just as with the rest of the population, their intakes are suboptimal. And so it's important, for functioning as an athlete, that they have a very healthy heart, very healthy brain. And there's some very preliminary and recent research in the area of DHA and the protection of the brain as it relates to concussion. But it's important for me to stress at this point that this is very exciting research, but it is preliminary and it needs to be investigated further. So when we think about sources of DHA, where are we going to get them from? Well, if you look to the right and to the left of the cell, first of all, we're going to take a look at the right of the cell. So as I mentioned, the fish will eat the algae, and then what happens is the fish will be collected and then processed to give you a source of fish oil. But remember, this is a somewhat uncontrolled environment, one in the types of fishes that you're getting, so there can be high variability in the amount of EPA and DHA that's in there. But also for some individuals, there's concern about the fishing environments that they came from. On the other side of this slide, we're going to talk specifically about life DHA, which is the algal source of DHA. So essentially, we're really just cutting out the middleman, which is the fish. So we have the algae, which is then grown in a very closed and controlled environment. So you can say that these are free of the ocean-borne contaminant worries. And then they undergo this process, which then produces this algal DHA source. And you can see this little leaf on the top left-hand side. That helps you identify when you're looking at labels, if you're looking for the algal source, that these products do indeed contain the algal DHA. So just to give you a few more details about Life's DHA and what makes it a very interesting product is it's a vegetarian source of DHA, and that's rather unique, but it can also be used by individuals who have kosher and halal dietary practices, but it's also good news for individuals who, say, have allergies to fish, so this would be considered a non-allergenic source. And of course, it's naturally free of these ocean-borne contaminants. But it has we're very proud to say that it has a very long history of research. In fact, research has been conducted over the past decade with well over 100 studies using Life's DHA in different populations, infants, young kids, and adults. And it is well proven to be a high quality, but also a very safe product. As you can imagine, it would need to be, because it's now being used in 99% of all the U.S. infant formulas, and it's also in over 500 food and beverage products around the world. So there's no safety issues to worry about with Life's DHA. And in this day and age, we're always concerned about concerns of the declining fish populations. Even if we could have everyone consuming 1 to 2 servings of fish per day, we just wouldn't have the fish supplies to be able to provide that. And so it's important that the algal source of DHA really gives you an opportunity to have a product that comes from a renewable source, that you have consistent levels of DHA in. And so when you're shopping in the supermarket, this is really just a picture of some of the products that are available out there on the market. So there are certainly supplements. You can look for those with, for example, algal oil in there, and we talked about the symbol, which will help you with that. You know, we used to think of many of these supplements as not being particularly user-friendly for children, but now there are actually chewables out there for the smaller kids, you know, for your 4-year-old. And then, of course, for younger ones, there are now sprinkles available. And the beauty of that is that you can actually mix it in with the foods that your particular son or daughter enjoy the most. And then, of course, there are, you can see here, for example, a silk product, which is a soy product that contains DHA. There are some organic milk products that have it, but also some of the juices and some of the more diverse products like the eggs, and even sushi gets DHA added to it. And of course, you may recognize some of the other products in there that you were using while you were pregnant. So if you have any questions about looking for DHA or some of the science associated with DHA, I'd be very glad to help you with that. So please feel free to send any of your questions to me at the email address indicated on the slide, and I would be happy to respond to you. And thank you so much for your attention today.
Thanks, Sheila. This was really informative. Hi, everyone. This is Sarah from Kiwi again. Sheila, I just want to thank you so much for really helping us understand DHA. You know, it's become sort of a buzzword that we know is important, and I feel like we all probably have a much better understanding of why and where to get it now. And I know we have so many vegetarian readers and listeners, and who are eager for a way to cut out the middleman, the fish, as you said. So thank you for sharing about the algal source of DHA. So thank you so much, Sheila, for being here.
Thank you for having me.
Wonderful. And everyone, I hope you have enjoyed it. And I think that it's so generous of Sheila and Martech to answer our questions. Any questions that you have, email this address, advertising@martech.com, and they'll get back to us. So thank you again, Sheila, and thank you everyone for being here. And have a good, wonderful rest of your day, everyone. Bye-bye.